So shalom, welcome. My name is Rabbi Johnny Solomon. Thank you so much for joining us for the second part in a four-part course titled How to Design and Deliver a Shiur. I am the Chief Learning Officer at WebYeshiva.org, and I encourage you to look at our website for many more free online single classes and courses, both relating to Elul, the Amim Noraim, and a whole range of other topics. We also have our Halacha Mastery program, which we're very, very proud of. And that, if that interests you, feel free to discuss with us if you'd like to register. And of course, in addition to that, I work as the virtual rabbi at Web Yeshiva, providing online spiritual coaching and halachic consultations to men, women, and couples. And if that interests you, you can book a free discovery call to explore what that might look like, or you can book a single session or series of sessions. So that is WebYeshiva.org, and this is the second in our series, How to Design and Deliver a Shiur. And I want to jump straight in and just review what we did last time and then proceed further. So last time we discussed what is a shiur and choosing a topic. You may recall that I compared like a snack of a popcorn and a mini shiur to like some street food, and then a real shiur, a substantive shiur, to being a multi-course meal. And I said our course here is really talking about preparing a shiur, something with a series of ideas connecting together to stimulate an audience, engage them, help them learn something or go through something. And that's what we discussed then. Again, I appreciate those who joined us in the synchronous class and also those who were able to watch and listen to the recording a day or so afterwards. So thank you. Let's now move on to today's session, session 2. And we're going to focus on researching a topic and recommended resources. And what I'm going to share is based on my experience, and my experience both as somebody who delivers a lot of shiurim and also as somebody who's been involved in curriculum writing and creating frameworks of study. And at the same time, I'd be more than happy to hear your ideas, your feedback. Like last time, this is meant to be more of a conversation than just a lecture. So feel free to share your thoughts either in the chat or by unmuting yourself wherever you feel confident and comfortable doing so. With that in mind, I want to begin. And I want to begin by reminding you of the last thing I mentioned in our last session. And I said most shiurim, and of course there are always exceptions, but most shiurim are either a question and an answer, or a series of answers, or they are about analysis and insight. They're not just about a question or an answer. They're trying to understand a text or a concept. And I think it's worthwhile contrasting these two kind of models of shiur and also exploring what they mean in terms of your research. And what I've written here is a question and answer is a closed question research, meaning there's a specific thing you're looking to find out about in your research and specific set of answers which you're trying to provide, which you're intending to deliver. Some call that closed question research because you're looking within a certain limited range of topics because you're interested in addressing a particular question and you're perhaps looking for one or a range of answers. In contrast, when you're giving a shiur which is about analysis or insight, could be analysis of a particular biblical text or rabbinic text or a piece of liturgy, a piece of prayer, you don't necessarily have a clear answer, but instead you're trying to make sense of that. And I think that's slightly different. It's more what I would call an open question research. When you do research, you don't necessarily know what you're going to discover. You don't necessarily know what you're looking for. So when a person researches a first type of shiur, a question answer, they at least think they know what they're looking for and look in certain areas, in certain books, to try and find the answer to the question that either they've come up with or they've seen other people come up with. Whereas if you give a shiur which is about analysis or insight, you look at a range of perhaps texts when researching your shiur, but you don't necessarily know what you're looking for. You're looking for interesting stuff, yeah? Things that may be stimulating for a learner in terms of enriching their analysis and insight of that particular text. Before we go on, any question just about these definitions? They're quite broad, admittedly, but I think it's important to note, sometimes when you prepare a shiur, you're looking towards a very specific target. And sometimes you're just basically kind of looking around the field of ideas which relate to a particular thing, namely a text or story or whatever. Any thoughts about that? Not meant to be radical, but
No,
still.
sometimes it's about, if you're going to speak at an occasion, or bar mitzvah or kiddush or something, you want to connect it either to the parsha or to the occasion.
Correct. However, those are more so what I referred to last time as being kind of the snack divrei Torah, the short idea, the short vort, or the mini shiur. Those are interesting, and often they have a particular agenda. But preparing those are different because you're fitting in an idea for a particular occasion. When you're asked to give a shiur, it may well be to do with the Inyani Diyoma. It could be you're giving a shiur about Rosh Hashanah because Rosh Hashanah is coming up, but you're not necessarily trying to fit it in with a particular person or particular occasion. Yuda, you raised your hand.
So I noticed the Rav has invited conversation. And it occurs to me that in the first instance of a closed question research, wouldn't we attempt to discourage conversation if we are trying to drive to a particular end, as opposed to analysis and insight? Maybe I want to know what everyone else thinks.
Correct. That's exactly the point. When you're researching, and I'm going to give an example in a minute, when you're searching a very specific question, a very specific detail, then you kind of have a circle of things you're interested in exploring, but you're not necessarily looking beyond that. You're limiting yourself because your focus is quite limited. Analysis may be limited to a text, but you don't necessarily know the scope of the analysis or necessarily the breadth of the insights that may interest you. So the kind of dynamic of the shiur when you're giving a question / answer shiur versus an analysis / insight is often quite different, but also so too the approach of your research. Now, of course, it's important to note, I'm generalizing here. Sometimes a person can approach a question answer with a curiosity which is very similar to analysis and insight. And perhaps sometimes a person can approach analysis and insight with a certain closed-mindedness which is similar to question and answer. Still, when I prepare shiur, sometimes I'm looking very specifically about a particular topic, and that narrows the range of sources I may well look to because I'm only interested in that thing. Whereas if I'm interested in analysis or insight, I may well be looking a little bit broader, both in terms of the Jewish bookshelf, but also in terms of the kind of ideas and sources I may be wishing to incorporate in the shiur. So it has a bearing both on the methodology of research and correct, also the tone and dynamic of the shiur itself regarding how far and what you necessarily wish to include, what kind of comments you necessarily wish to invite in that particular shiur. Now, let's give some examples. And so I've written out what most people do. Please note, this is not meant to be patronizing. I've been giving shiurim for more than 25 years in different contexts. And this is probably how I used to prepare a shiur. But I'm going to add a further dimension after this. But imagine I wish to prepare a shiur here, and I've written in terms of question and answer. And the specific question I wish to explore is, why don't we say vidui on Rosh Hashanah? It's a very reasonable question. It's a fascinating question. Why, if Rosh Hashanah is about tshuva, and we know that tshuva, in terms of its process, involves confession, and that's evident from the Tanakh and explicit by the Rambam, then why do we not say the confession on Rosh Hashanah? So imagine I was going to give a shiur on the topic, and just by the by, I wrote an article about this topic quite some years ago. So this is based on an exercise I've done. So what would I do when preparing a shiur? The truth is, I probably already am interested in the topic because I read an article about the topic. That doesn't always occur, but it often occurs. I read something, and I basically want to re-deliver something that somebody else has delivered, but in my own way. So I'll review the insight or the article or the shiur that I previously read or heard where this topic was addressed. I may then add a few additional frills, a few additional insights from the books I have at home. I may look on Google, on Sefaria, to see what else other people have said on the topic, and I may well add that to my chulent pot of different kind of ideas, which is going to become my shiur. And then I'm going to bring everything together and deliver the shiur. This is what most people do, and I'm not speaking pejoratively. Many people who deliver a shiur, it's based on something they've read already, and so they decide on a topic, but it's actually a topic that they've encountered elsewhere, and they repackage, adding a few additional voices and insights, somebody else's presentation, and that becomes their shiur, which is wonderful. And this is basically, certainly for the first many years I gave shiurim, that's exactly what I did. It would be a halachic article I read from Rabbi Bleich, or it would be a Talmudic essay that I read from this one, or some kind of analysis of some psukim that I read from somebody else, or an essay about a chag. And I'd think about the idea, I'd take that essay or that shiur, try and find some additional sources to kind of add further flavor to the subject, and then deliver it, and that would be my shiur. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, and majority of people who deliver shiurim do exactly this. However, there is an important point which is certainly deserving of mention. And what is the important point? It is my favorite rabbinic saying ever. And it's a rabbinic saying mentioned in the Yerushalmi. It's also mentioned in Tosfot, and in the Yerushalmi it's mentioned as an explanation to a verse which we sing every Friday night. I've written it in red in one version that it appears in Chazal, and the next text is how it appears in the Yerushalmi, which is Divrei Torah anim b'makom echad v'ashirim b'makom acher. Let me explain to you this idea, because unless you understand this idea, you will get stuck and you will narrow the kind of range of ideas you necessarily incorporate in a shiur. We sing every Friday night, Hayta ka'aniyot socher merchak tavi lachma. She's like a merchant ship, from great distance she brings her wares. That's a beautiful song that we sing about the Eshet Chayil, which of course many interpret to refer to Shabbat or Torah, but of course it's also being understood to be referring to Ruth, because written by Shlomo Melech, and Ruth herself is described as being an Eshet Chayil. And here we're saying she's like a merchant ship, from great distance she brings her wares, on which Chazal say in the Yerushalmi, apologies for that, Divrei Torah anim b'makom v'ashim b'makom acher. The words of the Torah are poor in one place and they're rich in other places. What that means is, sometimes when you're researching a Torah topic, you need to look in the less obvious places in order to carry out your research. Meaning, if you're looking to interpret a pasuk in Yeshayahu, don't just look on the commentaries on Yeshayahu to interpret that pasuk. By the way, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be looking there. Of course you should. But it's quite possible that an interpretation for that pasuk in Yeshayahu is found in a much more far-flung place. And your responsibility, therefore, is to scour the seas of Torah and to try and find the wares of Chazal, which are being brought from afar, which may well be found in more far-flung places. Now, going back to our original kind of flow chart here, Often when you decide on a topic and you review an insight and you look in the books and you bring them together, that's fine. But it's possible that a beautiful idea, a beautiful insight, a beautiful answer to this question is found in a more far-flung place. Now, admittedly, we can't always find all the time in the world to read every book in the world about every question in the world. But we should be aware that sometimes brilliant answers to questions we're exploring or wonderful analyses to texts we're explaining are found in less obvious places. Before we go on, any thoughts about that? I'll bring back the slide here. Any thoughts about this idea of Haytak aniyot zochem amerchak tavilachma? Yuda.
My style here would be that I would say they probably thought, or they probably saw a homophone in aniyim and aniyim. They're spelled different, but they sound the same, and they drew a parallel to them. I love to look at the prosaic of how things are written and how we derive meaning from them.
So I really appreciate you explaining the drasha ultimately of Chazal here in the Yerushalmi, and that's quite possibly what inspired them, Kanyot, Aniyim, etc. Again, the Tosfot bring it without this pasuk. It's mentioned 2-3 times in classic rabbinic sources, but obviously my point here, though, the drasha and how they drew that lesson is fascinating. Ultimately, the lesson is there may well be beautiful ideas and less than obvious places. And we should be aware of that. Any further thoughts just on this idea?
Hi, Rav Johnny. I have a question.
Sure.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
I think I find it daunting to know how to navigate the sea of options in terms of Jewish texts.
Well, the short answer is everybody finds it daunting, because when you actually go to a substantive Jewish library like the new National Library in Jerusalem or Bar Ilan, even somebody who is holding, shall we say, in Jewish learning, they look at these shelves and say, I will never be able to know all of the wisdom found in all of these works. However, it's about being curious, about recognizing that there could be places which are interesting and doing a little bit of digging, again, within reason. I'll give you a random example actually specifically about this topic of saying vidui on why we don't say vidui in Rosh Hashanah. As it happens, I'm from the UK. I know you are as well, originally. And the former chief rabbi of England, Lord Jacobovitz, has a wonderful essay on this topic. And that wonderful essay is written in Hebrew, in basically a collection of his essays, which include mostly essays to do with medical ethics, meaning you wouldn't know it's there unless you knew it was there. Now, I wouldn't blame anybody for not being aware of that. But it's quite possible that a great essay on the topic that you're exploring is found in a far-flung place. So how do we know? Well, in fact, there are databases of academic articles which we can refer to. You may not always do that, especially for a fairly predictable topic of halakha or hashkafa. But when we're dealing with something of a specialist nature or a particular area of research, looking at, for example, articles and looking through things like Rambi, which is a collection of the titles of academic articles, may well be worthwhile the 5 minutes it takes. So one can never look through everything exhaustively. But if you are researching a topic, assume that what you have in front of you may well represent a significant collection of voices on the topic. But nobody's going to be exhaustive. And so if you really want to explore something, it may well take significantly more time, and there may well be certain databases that it's worthwhile consulting in realms, fields, genres of Jewish writing, which may well be less obvious to the average person. So I'm not negating the daunting nature of what I'm suggesting. What I am saying is you can prepare a shiur based on the sources you have, but just ultimately know that the shiur will be a representative of the sources you have. And the broader the sources, quite possibly the broader ideas that you incorporate. And so if you're really preparing a shiur and putting your all into it, trying to look as broad as possible may well reap its dividends. Now, on this point, I want to bring to your attention the second rabbinic statement on this slide, which seems to be slightly disconnected to the first, but you'll see why in a minute. It quotes again from a verse from Mishlei, from the verse from Proverbs. It talks about basically suckling from a breast from all and it's talking obviously about a baby who is receiving their milk. To which our rabbis in Masechet Eruvin say, Lama limsharu divrei Torah tridad. Why do we describe, because Mishlei is often understood to be referring to our relationship with Torah, why do we describe the words of Torah as if suckling from a breast? Ma'adad zeh kol zman she'atinok mashmesh bo motze bo chalav, af divrei Torah kol zman she'adam hogeh bahen motze bahem ta'am. Basically, as long as a baby suckles, they will have milk. As long as we are involved in meditating on Torah, we will find something of substance. It's an interesting metaphor, but why do I mention it? Because I want to now share with you a beautiful teaching by Rav Chaim Volozhin in his commentary on Pirkei Avot. At the end of chapter 5 of Pirkei Avot, we are taught Ben Bagbag Omer. Ben Bagbag says, Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba dekula ba. Delve it and delve in it, because everything is in it. Right? We can continue, but we'll pause there for a second. On this, Rav Chaim Volozhin says the following: Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba, k'mo she'amru rabbeinu zichronam livracha. This is like what the rabbis say in Masechet Eruvin, the piece that I just read. Lama nimshala Torah ladad, ma hadad, etc. It's what the rabbi said. Why is the Torah compared to suckling? Because just as the baby is able to draw milk, so too we're able to draw ideas from Torah, Kena Torah. And then he says the following, Lemashal. And this, I remember the first time I read this, it really blew me away, and I've shared this with many, many people throughout the ages. Lemashal, midin sukkah yecholim lotzi latir aguna v'chadome. Says Rav Chaim Volozhin, who was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. For example, it's possible that when you study the laws of Sukkah, you may be able to develop a certain rationale to permit an aguna from being released from her absent in that kind of situation husband. What's the connection with Hilchot Sukkah and Hilchot Aguna? The short answer is, by delving into the laws of Sukkah, you may find that there are certain principles, there are certain insights which are beneficial in helping us make sense of a whole different other area of halakha. I can give some suggestion why in a moment. Basically, what Chaim Volozhin says is sometimes you may think a mitzvah isn't relevant to today, or one mitzvah is not connected to the other. But in fact, when you meditate on the mitzvot, you find that they are ultimately interconnected, which is why sometimes when you're studying one area of Torah, you'll find an insight which is beneficial to another area of Torah. I'll give you a completely random example. Mamash just happened yesterday. I was reading through the essays of Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, the Sridei Eish, on the Chagim. There's been a collection of his essays on the Chagim, which was produced with somebody else writing a further commentary. And because it's coming up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I wondered what he said about shofar and this, that, and the other. And I was reading the essay about shofar, and there in one of the commentaries written by the person who edited this work, they happened to make reference to the Egla Arufa, which we were reading that Shabbat in the Parshat Shoftim. I mean, I'm reading about shofar, all of a sudden I find an insight about Egla Arufa. I would never have thought the one goes with the other, but they did. because sometimes in one area of Torah, you'll find an insight about another area of Torah. What that basically tells us is, each of us often look in different pockets of Torah. But ultimately, as a pasuk says, Torah Hashem Tmima Mishivat Nafesh. Only when the Torah is seen in its entirety, where the ideas hyperlink with one another, do we fully fathom the totality of Torah, such that the dinim of Sukkah can enrich our understanding and help us achieve insights and reach rulings in regards to the laws of Agunah, for example. Now, what has this got to do with the topic of how to design and deliver a shiur? Exactly the point that I mentioned here with respect to the Yerushalmi. Divrei Torah ani b'makom echad v'ashir b'makom acher. If you are giving a shiur about Egla Arufa, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to be quoting from a commentary on an essay about Hilchot Shofar. But in fact, I can tell you in a commentary on an essay in Hilchot Shofar, there's a brilliant insight about Egla Arufa. So looking broadly sometimes means that we encounter things we didn't expect to encounter. And if you're preparing a shiur and you're only learning the commentaries on Egla Arufa in the Mikra Gdolot to make sense of that mitzvah, well, you'll understand a lot, but you may have overlooked some further insights. Any thoughts about this? This is an important fundamental, basically about Torah itself, which I think was better understood in previous generations, and now we live in a much more compartmentalized world, both in terms of how we live and especially how we learn Torah. Perhaps this is less well understood. Any thoughts about this?
If you keep learning, then you'll keep seeing things that connect to other things you're learning or preparing.
Exactly.
Secret is to just keep learning.
That's exactly the secret. In fact, the word masechet, which we often translate as tractate, really means web. And I use the word, I think, hyperlink. You know, when the internet was developed, we recognized that there was this database of information which was webbed with each other, was hyperlinked with each other. Well, actually, Chazal did this already thousands of years ago. And there are ideas which are connected. I'll give you a really interesting example. There's a din in the realm of Taharat HaMishpacha called Harchakot, where a man and woman who are married are supposed to maintain some kind of boundary from one another. And that limits them in terms of how they share food, because sharing food can be an intimate act. So within the dinim of Harchakot, we are told that certain boundaries should be in place when the couple are in a status of nida. That's a din. What's interesting is exactly the same rule applies when a man and another man, or a woman and another woman, are eating on a table, and he is eating meat and he is eating milk, or she is eating milk and meat and she is eating milk. Meaning, we have within the realm of basar v'chalav a din of harchakot. We have in the realm of hilchot nida harchakot. They're basically the same rule. But who would have thought necessarily that these two areas are connected? But they are. They are clearly connected. They're part of the web of halacha. And the more one learns, the more you realize that some areas of halacha are very much connected to other areas of halacha, even though they necessarily don't seem to have any common theme, because they're both speaking about distance and boundaries and not overstepping those boundaries. And if that applies with basar b'chalav and hilchot nida, just think about all the other areas where there can be connections, and there are. And that's the whole point of Limud Torah. We start seeing those connections. So when you're preparing a shiur, you may be looking in one area. Imagine you're, exploring the dinim of harchakot. So I may well say to you, have a look at basar b'chalav. You'd say, why do I need to be looking at that? Say, because it's the same thing. It's a different siman, but it's the same thing, right? And the more we understand ultimately into what the purpose of a din is, right, and what it's trying to contribute, the more we recognize that they are much more unified. Halacha is ultimately a unified system, which may well be divided up in different sections of Shulchan Aruch and Simanim or Rambam or Masechta or whatever. But it's a unified theory of how to be an Eved Hashem. And that's really important. Any further thoughts before we move on to the topic of analysis? Okay, so we've spoken about Divrei Torah Ani Makom Echad, Vashir Makom Acher. Let me give you an image to hold that thought, and we're going to see this image once more. I saw this online. I thought I'd share this with you. Expect the unexpected. Here, it looks like an apple from the outside. It's an orange on the inside. When learning Torah, expect the unexpected. In fact, the more you learn Torah, the more you learn to expect the unexpected. Like I said, learning an essay about Hilchot Shofar and encountering an insight on Parshat HaShavua, which is by no means an obvious thing. And this doesn't just apply, by the way, to particular essays. I'll give you a random example. Rabbi Yehuda Henkin, he has 4 volumes of Tshuvot, halachic response about a range of things. But in one of the ends of one of the volumes, he has a collection of Torah insights, basically Parsha insights. He doesn't say it on the front cover, Shalos Tshuvos B'nai Bonim plus Parsha insights called Chiba Yetera, but it's there. Sometimes embedded within a certain type of book is another type of idea. And this actually goes back to that teaching of the Ruach Chaim. I mentioned that this was an insight I've shared a number of times with people. And I remember the first time. I was in a Jewish library in London, and I was kind of being nosy about what other people were learning. It's always good to ask around. And I said to some rabbi, what are you learning? He says, I'm learning the dinim of Hilchos Aguna. I said, why are you looking just at these books? He says, I don't understand. Like the books are, literally the titles were on that topic. I said, yeah, but maybe you should be learning Hilchos Sukkah. He thought I was crazy. He said, what are you on about? Stop messing me around. I said, that's the problem, my friend. If you really want to understand how to help people, you need to think more broader than just looking at the books with the title of the topic you're exploring. You need to think laterally. And I explained to him, by the way, why would there be a connection between Din Sukkah and being Batir and Aguna? Because within Sukkah we see a whole range of halachic compromises in terms of how the walls of a Sukkah can reach the roof, and the roof of a Sukkah can reach the walls. I mean, the dinim of Sukkah teach us about halachic flexibility. And I think this is an important message that we can derive in terms of dealing with tough questions. So, again, I was both being playful but also serious. When we're researching a topic, we do need to look a little bit broader. So I just saw there was a chat comment. And yeah, sometimes we have blinders on to totally focus on where we have to go, which is understandable. The problem is it may be understandable, but then we miss things. If you've ever watched shows about detectives, the Columbo is never looking in the obvious place. He's looking in the less obvious place. Whenever you're preparing a shiur, you're being a detective, okay? And looking in the obvious places is obviously necessary, but also looking in the less obvious places and to expect the unexpected. And once you do that, you start seeing connections which are so elegant and so beautiful, but you only see them once you lean in to look for them, right? You only see them when you're prepared to take off those blinders. And when that occurs, in terms of any shiur you're delivering, it becomes so much better, so much richer, so much more beautiful. So I can see Nathan's comment about basically, this is, sometimes we do obviously need to figure out time. This is where, by the way, technology comes in. I'm a strong believer in using technology. Technology can help me look in less expected places. That doesn't mean you'll solve everything. Doesn't mean you'll cover every sefer. But use the tools at your disposal to try and maximize your reach, right? Use a net rather than just a fishing rod. And you may find that you're able to bring in more fish. Now, let's now talk about analysis and insight. A shiur which is going to be necessarily are looking at a particular text. Here I've given an example. Decide on a topic. Imagine you're giving a shiur exploring the tshuva lessons from Sefer Yonah. That's a reasonable topic, very much related to Inyana Diyoma coming up to Yom Kippur. And I say, I want to give a shiur on Yonah, and I want to speak about the lessons of tshuva that we learn from the book. I haven't necessarily defined what the answers will be. I know that I'm going to look for some insights which I wish to share. Now, like I said before, oftentimes we choose a topic because we read an article or heard a shiur which inspired us, and then we kind of try and regurgitate that and add some additional sources, either based on books we have at home or on things we find on Google, on Sfari or Ala Torah, and all these other great resources. And we then try and bring things together. My point again is, expect the unexpected. If you really want to understand the tshuva lessons from Sefer Yonah, you may find that they're found in a medrash in Vayikra Rabbah. You may find that some insights are found in Musa Sefer. Again, there's limits on how much we can look. All I'm asking you to do is don't be blinkered and only look in the most obvious places, because that will limit you in necessarily exploring a broader range of ideas and insights. And once you encounter some beautiful ideas in many different places, you come to realize, wow, Sefer Yonah is a really fascinating thing. Haraya, what's the proof? Just look at before. I quoted two Mamrei Chazal. One is Yerushalmi Masechet Rosh Hashanah, one is a Gemara in Masechet Eruvin. And both are interpreting verses from Mishlei. That means if I want to know how our sages interpreted Mishlei, I may need to go to Yerushalmi Rosh Hashanah and Talmud Bavli Masechet Eruvin. Now, how do you do that? There are actually books and resources which tell me where the rabbis quote that verse. We mentioned last time in Mekrog Dolot, you'll have a reference to where these verses are quoted in the rabbinic literature. But if you're focusing on Mishlei, you may need to look beyond the classic commentaries on Mishlei. Expect the unexpected. Before we go on, any thoughts about the things I've said? By the way, I got feedback from last time, which is somebody said, you know, you're asking a lot from us. I said, yeah, I know. I mean, I know that people know how to put together a nice shiur. I'm trying to suggest taking it to the next level. And I know what I'm suggesting is challenging. But at the same time, the effort is certainly worthwhile. And broadening our vista and being more intentional when we look at different things will ultimately inspire us. And once we're inspired more, we're more likely to inspire others. Any thoughts about this image, this teaching, and what we've said about these two categories of shiurim and how we prepare them? Everyone's quiet today. Okay, so what I want to do is mention a couple of go-to Sfarim that I would like to showcase. By the way, I'm sitting in my study and I'm happy to literally show you what these books are, and others for that matter. And so if anybody wants to say, what would you do if you want X, Y, Z? I'm happy to try and answer it. Let's say the following. Imagine you're giving a shiur about halacha and you are referencing the Shulchan Aruch. Well, rule number one, and this is not my rule, this is a rule of Rav Yosef Karo. Rav Yosef Karo basically says, if you wish to claim to understand the Shulchan Aruch, you need to first read my commentary in the Torah called the Bet Yosef. That's a simple, the Shulchan Aruch is ultimately a distillation of a broader commentary called the Bet Yosef. So rule number one in terms of preparing a halacha shiur, don't quote the Shulchan Aruch unless you first look at the Bet Yosef, which often includes the Talmudic sources informing that halacha. You can't claim to understand the Shulchan Aruch unless you know where that ruling came from. Now, as I write in brackets, additionally, you may find the Aruch HaShulchan of use, the way Rabbi Epstein put together the Aruch HaShulchan, meant that he also kind of reviews some of the sources which Rav Yosef Karo puts together. Any question about that rule of thumb? Some of you may be interested in giving shiurim in halacha, some less. But this is not meant to be a controversial statement. This is a 101. This is written, it's a rule written 500 years ago from the guy who wrote the Shulchan Aruch. Of course, if you don't have a Bet Yosef, then that text is available online in various different places, in either in a digitized way like on Sfaria. You can find many books on things like Hebrew books. But one needs to look at the Bet Yosef if you're doing more than making vague reference to halacha and the Shulchan Aruch. Rule number 2, if you're giving a halacha shin, by the way, this is just a collection of rules. If a halachic handbook or summary of commentaries, for example, the Piskei Teshuvot, which is a modern summary of commentaries on the Orach Chaim section of the Shulchan Aruch, you've studied, did not mention a particular opinion, this does not mean that such an opinion does not exist. What it means is the author of that handbook did not necessarily either know of that additional opinion or was not particularly interested in that particular opinion. This occurs, by the way, often where the issues might be considered to be ideological. By the way, that's not necessarily always the case. But the author of the Piskei Teshuvot does not quote the rulings of Rav Nachum Rabinovich, even though Rav Nachum Rabinovich was a great Talmid Chacham. So there may well be a ruling of Nachum Rabinovich that won't be mentioned in that collection of rulings. Doesn't mean he doesn't exist. It means that book is based on collating the opinions of a finite number of works. If you're giving a shiur, then if you only rely on that book, you're relying on that finite number of works. If you want to look more broadly, then you need to look more broadly. So when you're looking at a halachic handbook or a summary of commentaries, be aware of what bookshelf or what volumes of bookshelf the author was consulting, and be aware that they may not have consulted other works that may be of interest to you. Rule number 3, always check sources, especially when it comes to halacha. When a person will say the halacha is X based on what this person says, often that's a very simple summary. If you can, look at the original response and they may be quoting. You may find that they added a further condition that wasn't necessarily mentioned, especially if you're reading a halachic handbook. And especially, just because an author says the halacha is X, this does not mean the halacha is X. It means the author thinks the halacha is X. So if you're giving a shiur, be aware that you're relying on the research of somebody else who is determining a certain conclusion. If you want to determine that conclusion, you need to do the legwork. Any thoughts about this? You know, some of you may know that I'm interested in halacha and I paskin shaylos, so obviously this topic is pretty significant to the work that I do. Any thoughts about this? Obviously, we can make many more rules, but I just thought I'd whet your appetite. Okay, if you're giving a shiur about agada, right? Agadata, that can be both midrash and found in the Talmud Yerushalmi, and especially Talmud Bavli. Most of the commentaries on Agadata are not found in most libraries, for various reasons, just to do with sometimes how popular they were. So if you're exploring a piece of Agadata and you really want to know what people say about it, you may need to look at a collection of, you may need to look at a work which collects the opinions of Agadata commentaries. So there's a wonderful work by Rabbi Moshe Tzuriel titled Leket Pirushei Agada, which is a 4-volume set, which, by the way, is free, available to be downloaded off HebrewBooks.org. Or there's a wonderful digital database which reviews the opinions of Agada commentaries on this website, Halacha Brura. But ultimately, if you're looking for a commentary on Agadata, you may not necessarily find it in the regular books, because most regular books don't necessarily delve that much into providing explanations on Agadata. Here, for example, if you're giving a shiur on Chumash, on Tanakh, you need to understand the goal of the commentaries you're quoting. For example, the Kli Yakar is ultimately a summary of sermons given by Rabbi Ephraim Hinsk. If you don't know that, and if you think he's giving a classical commentary, then you're most likely to misunderstand what he's doing with his commentary. Every commentary has its own goals. So if you want to understand what a commentary is doing, the best advice is read the introduction of that commentary, which is generally printed in the Bereshit volume of Mikra Gdolot. And if you're less inclined in doing so, I highly recommend the late Abigail Rock's wonderful book, Great Biblical Commentators, where she's summarized the general exegetical methodologies of the great biblical commentators, explaining what they are doing. But unless you know what they're doing, you won't necessarily understand why they say what they say and why they don't say what they don't say. You know, Rabbi Hirsch is trying to do something in his commentary. The Ibn Ezra is trying to do something in his commentary. You need to know that if you're going to reference these different commentaries. Each are doing different things. I mentioned here, if you're going to give a shiur related to Midrash, certainly between Bereshit and the end of Bamidbar, I'd always strongly recommend you have a look at the Torah Shlema and his commentary there. That's Menachem Kasha. All the volumes of Torah Shlema are available. It should say HebrewBooks.org. You can download them all whatever it is, like 42 volumes. It's an amazing gift, Hebrew Books, where you can download PDFs for free of tens of thousands of books and wonderful books like Torah Shlema, which is a great opportunity. If you're exploring Midrash, look at, basically there are certain go-to books which are experts in certain areas. The Leket Perushei Haggadah is an expert in collating the interpretation of Haggadah, which Rabbi Tzuriel made. Torah Shlema is an expert collation of Midrashim and an analysis of Midrash. And finally, just in terms of a few basic guidelines, books which claim to address a particular topic of machshava in Jewish thought often only do so from one perspective. A book about Hashgacha Pratis often will only present one view of Hashgacha Pratis. I know, because it's a topic which interests me greatly, and I have numerous books on the topic. On this point, as I write, there's a fundamental question whether there can ever be consensus, majority rule in matters of machshava, meaning sometimes people assume if the majority of people adopt this approach about a matter of Jewish thought, then that must be the kosher one. That's actually a strongly debated question. So these are just some tips about preparing shiurim with respect to halacha, agada, chumash, machshava. We could have done more, but these are just a useful start. Any points which are mentioned here which you'd like to respond to, or any points which I haven't mentioned here which you'd like to raise? So we have a few minutes left. I've only got one or two more things to share. So now will be an opportune time for questions.
Any tips on making the connection? Sorry, it's noisy here. Any tips on making the connection between halacha and the Gada, for instance?
So, let's just to sharpen the question. Agada in Gemara often means non-legal, right? That's often how we interpret Agada. And halacha means halacha, legal. And we often assume that they are disconnected. However, that's not necessarily the case. The spirit of halacha is expressed in Agada. And various different thinkers, for example, Chaim David Levi, tried to bring those together. Chaim David Levi did that in his 5-volume Makor Chaim HaShalem. And to a certain measure, Eliezer Melamed does that in his Peninei Halacha. In the introduction to each area, he often quotes Agada to explain halacha. So there is a synergy between the two, but it does take a certain measure of skill to understand that synergy. Beyond that, of course...
I think I meant machshava.
Oh, apologies. Between machshava and halacha, or machshava and agada then?
For instance, to start off with halacha and then go into the realm of machshava, get a message.
Beautiful. So there are some works that do that. And in particular, Hasidic works of halacha are very machshavti. Hasidic works in halacha often are not limited to giving practical directives, but instead are interested in exploring the spiritual significance or the the significance in terms of how we live and how we think in relation to what we do. So there are various different works which I can point to your direction, depending on the area of halacha you're interested in exploring regarding its machshavti foundation. I have, for example, I have the 2-volume Shulchan Tahor, which is a Hasidic work on the first couple of hundred simanim of Orach Chaim, which provides Hasidic / Kabbalistic explanations about the meaning of why we do what we do. The Lubavitcher Rebbe does this all the time. So if you learn works of, again, Hasidic masters, including the Rebbe, you'll find this in every area where he addresses a halachic issue, you'll find that. Beyond that, especially when it comes to certain minhagim, there's a set called Nite Gavriel, which you can also download from Hebrew books, which explores this synergy. So we'll say there's a minhag to do this, and this is the reason why. So there are basically
What's the name of
certain
that
works
book
to do
again?
that.
What's the name of that book?
The last one or the first one?
The last one. I'm not sure.
Nite Gavriel, it's like a 30-volume set on kind of Jewish chagim and Jewish practices. So there's like a huge volume on 2 volumes of Rosh Hashanah, 1 in Yom Kippur, whatever. And it's really about minhagim, but it's also about the machshava and spiritual and Kabbalistic and Hasidic elements of certain minhagim. And I reference it very, very frequently. It's the beauty of having these digital databases is rather than buying 30 books, you can download these for free within a second or two from the computer and read them and enjoy them.
Thanks.
Any further thoughts? So Nathan said Torah Tamima is short and easy to deal with than Torah Shem by Rabbi Kasher. That's true. I'm a massive fan of the Torah Tamima. The issue is that the Torah Tamima does not quote all the midrashim, not even close. And so the Torah Tamima is primarily focused on Talmud Bavli. He quotes some midrashim, especially those which are cited by Rashi. Once in a while, he'll also quote a few Rishonim, but it's primarily focused on the relationship between psukim and how they appear in the Bavli and occasionally the Yerushalmi. Menachem Kasher, he quotes the Gemaras sometimes, but he primarily quotes the midrashim, especially the lesson of midrashim, which Torah Tamima never quotes. So they're doing slightly different things, and they do it in different ways. So you need both. And I study both most days. Most days I will have opened my Torah Tamima and likely open my Torah Shlema. They're retrieving different things and trying to make sense of different texts. Any further thoughts just about what's been said here? I'll mention 1 or 2 things about databases in a second. Okay, so let's do that now. And here are these, again, some random thoughts. There are numerous online databases. I am a lover of them, but with tremendous caution. If you use an online database and you just quote and you just copy and paste a text and you don't understand who wrote the book, you haven't read the introduction, the likelihood is you won't really understand that text itself. Okay, so even though I'm a strong advocate for online databases, I'm a strong advocate also for learning books from beginning to end to understand them, which you can do even if you're using an online database, but also it's obviously easier if you have a physical book. As I write here, to gain the most of each database, know their catalog, know what they have, because different databases have different catalogs. And also different databases have different quality texts. So for example, Ala Torah endeavors to use critical editions of certain texts. This is not always a case of a Sefaria. By the way, these are commercial reasons. This is not criticism. It's just a simple fact. That means that the edition of a Rambam that you might find on one website will be more likely more accurate than necessarily on another. And yes, those things arise. Here I mentioned, for example, Oitzer Chochma, which is a for-fee database, a massive for-fee database, which has more modern books available to look at and download than necessarily those found on Hebrew books. And it also has a sister project called Mefarshe Otzar, which basically on any page of Talmud, you can click that piece of Talmud and see between 20 and 100 different commentaries just on that line. It's ingenious, it's unbelievable. But even that, by the way, has its limitations, but certainly it's incredibly handy, especially if, for example, you're learning Daf Yomi, you want to know who talks about this line in the Gemara. Well, use Mefarshe Otzar, press a button, and then you'll literally have all those insights collated together in a fairly accurate way. But I'll just mention a few things. There's a wonderful set on Mishnah from a historical, sociological perspective called Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. The actual volumes, they're available, but they're quite costly. But all of that is now available for free on Sefaria. It's a tremendous gift. If you're interested in understanding the historical context of a statement in the Mishnah, look at the Mishnat Eretz Yisrael on Sefaria. I was fortunate to know Chana Safrai, one of the three authors of Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. I don't have most of the volume, but whenever I want to understand a Mishnah from that perspective, I go straight to Sefaria, I open that catalog and I study it. I mentioned Rav Nachum Rabinovich. He wrote a remarkable commentary on the Rambam called Yad Pshuta. You may not be aware, but Yad Pshuta is available, I think, in its totality on Ala Torah. That's amazing, right? I happen to have that set of books, but again, not everybody's able to do so. But to have that accessibility to Yad Pshuta within a couple of clicks, which explains the Rambam with such depth and clarity, is incredible. And on HaTanakh, for example, produced by Herzog, there's some wonderful essays. Ultimately, I mentioned before how when you research things, you need to kind of consider both what is an obvious place to look and what are the beyond obvious places to look. Amongst those are digital resources, but know that there are a range of digital resources and each add their own unique qualities and databases. So let's just do some conclusions. We spoke about researching a topic and recommended resources. I think depending on the topic, you're going to likely research it slightly differently. We talked about question-answer shiurim and insight and analysis shiurim. I made it clear, divrei Torah ani b'makom acher v'ashir b'makom. Divrei Torah ani b'makom echad v'ashir b'makom acher. Look beyond the obvious. Basically, expect the unexpected. Hafach ba v'hafach, the kulaba. That's a way in which you'll encounter ideas which will most certainly enrich the kind of more obvious standard answers perhaps to the question you're exploring, or more obvious standard insights to the text you're trying to explain. And there are certain approaches and certain works and certain tips for different areas that you're exploring. And I've just given you a short list. I'm quite sure I could make it longer. And finally, whichever database you use, everyone has pros, everyone has cons. But in particular, know their catalogs, know what they bring to the table, and maximize them to benefit. So what I'm going to do is, to let you know, this handout is now available on the Web Yeshiva website, meaning when you put in your email address, you'll find this as part of the lesson 2 resources. Obviously, if you have any further questions, please do be in contact. I believe you have my email address, and I wish you the very, very best. I hope this has been of some help, just in terms of getting a sense of how we prepare different shiurim and different topics, and how to navigate different kind of aspects of the Jewish library to benefit ourselves and our audience when we're delivering a shiur. If you would like some specific guidance, please do be in contact. And I look forward to our next session next week.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Take care, everybody. Bye, all.